Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
The Lost Brother by Psychotic Tomato. What if Luffy was trained harder by Garp and unlocked all 3 types of haki? What if because of that, Ace lives? What if Big Mom was better? What if Big Mom had a child kidnapped from her and the family? What if Luffy was said child? Adios.
Chapter 18. After leaving the archipelago, Panna poked Yen's shoulder to get his attention. "Nay Yuan, what did you and Luffy talk about?" she said while slowly moving her finger to poke his left cheek. Yuan's expression lit up while being unaffected by her older sister's poking, and Luffy turned towards Panna and hummed when he heard his name. "Ah, I picked up something about his battles you." The siblings and Mama raised their heads before slowly turning towards Yuan and Panna curiously. "What about them? He never talked about using haki at all you." This raised some eyebrows and caused some to go wide-eyed before all slowly stared at their brother in either curiosity or slight amazement. Panna on the other hand just waved it off. He probably would have mentioned using haki somewhere down the line when he tells us more about his little adventure during paradise. "Right?" Panna said while turning and questioning Luffy at the last part. Only one time." Now that caused more eyebrows to be raised at his response. "When you were fighting Gecko Moria then?" Panna asked, tilting her head. Her older sister Lola did talk about how Luffy and his little group of pirates beat the warlord and freed her along with some other people, especially freeing and getting a new crewmate. "Nah, he was strong but didn't need to use it against him." The siblings that were on the same thought along the lines of Panna were now surprised. "Then who? Who forced you to use haki then?" "Crocodile." "Ah, the warlord I say. Wait, what?" Panna was nodding as if that made sense before fully registering what her brother said and turning to look surprised. Mayukuru stepped up while raising an eyebrow at all her siblings, especially towards Luffy. "Didn't some Commodore beat Crocodile?" Yuan raised a finger to that statement. About that." Yuan went to explain how it was bizarre and strange for a mere Commodore to defeat a warlord, which they agreed. Either that was due to Marine's incompetence to see one's potential to be higher ranked, or the warlord had been slacking off and gotten weak over time. And also how in the newspaper it also mentioned Luffy along with his other fellow pirate mates being spotted in Arabasta during Crocodile's downfall. Even the siblings who weren't the brightest could see the picture of what really went down in Arabasta. "That Commodore didn't beat Crocodile, it was Luffy, wasn't it?" Effeler said what everyone was thinking about while glancing at Luffy. "Yup. Probably would have been a public embarrassment for the government if word got out that a pirate crew had dealt with the mess rather than the Marines themselves. I can imagine the outrage," Mont d'Or said thoughtfully while rubbing his chin, imagining the scenario. The Marines would have been viewed as an unreliable and an incompetent organization if the truth ever came to light. It would be way more troublesome considering Crocodile was given the position of warlord personally by the government too. Speaking of public embarrassment, how do you think the world is handling the news of the utter failure from the War of the Greats? Galette asked, which had Poire put a finger on her chin, being thoughtful about it. "Now that you mention it, the entire world saw how it went down and how the Marines got absolutely annihilated by our little bro, yes?" Poire said with a hint of pride and respect while looking at Luffy. "Especially with the main objective being to execute Roger's son, Ace being an utter failure. They took down Whitebeard, but it was either his decaying health and old age or fighting in Marineford that would have finished him off. Opera said wisely. Although Luffy's display of power probably had more of an effect considering he was just considered some rookie from East Blue. And it turned out that said rookie from East Blue would be the biggest annoyance and obstacle in the Marines' plans. Smoothie said while smiling towards Luffy. She wanted to spar with her brother to see how she can hold herself in a battle against him. Melise leaned forward while smiling sinisterly. A rookie along with some impelled down prisoners coming from the skies, defeating 3 admirals and castrating 1 for life, saving the son of the Pirate King, and not to only mention escaping with said son that was supposed to be executed. Yeah. The public outrage and complaints of this utter devastating failure has to be quite the sight to see. The rest also imagined it and can't help but see the public demanding answers on why they haven't eliminated that rookie earlier. He had broken and saved the devil child from Eni's lobby while defeating a cipher pull agent after all. That should have raised some eyebrows towards him. But they wrote him off as the same as the rest of the supernovas. Snack snorted before grinning. Imagine how the world would react if said rookie turned out to not only be the child of Dragon, but turned out to be the son of Mama as well when we finally reveal it. At that they can't help but crack smiles or grins at that image. Oh, the panic that would surge through the world when the day finally arrives. Luffy looked confused at why his siblings were smiling or giggling to themselves before shrugging and lying down on the fluffy cloud. Mama is Luffy's mama, so what if the world finds out? Unfortunately, there still hasn't been a single person who told him about his mother's status and position and how her bounty was 4 times bigger than his. Rayleigh figured that someone would have talked about how Luffy's mother is kind of a big deal, but nope, there hasn't been a single one yet. But even if he found out, that wouldn't change a thing between them, Yonko or not, he would always consider Lin to just be his mother. Looking up towards the night skies, he wondered about his hometown, the mountain bandits, Makino and Major Wood Slap, about the friends of his Nakama and people he met along the way. How would they react to the crazy shit he just pulled off in Marineford? Around the world, in various times, in Fuchsia Village's parties bar, 5 days after the war. A toast to those crazy boys of ours. Yeah, East Blue's pride and joy, Ace with 850 million and Luffy with a record-breaking billion. People were cheering and celebrating over the news of what Luffy did inside the bar while Makino just giggled while looking over the newspaper behind her counter. She was glad Luffy saved Ace and got of that place together. It was a pretty huge shock to them when they learned about Ace's and Luffy's fathers, but they still were the same to them either way, notorious parents or not, they still were Luffy and Ace. There were those who did curse them for their lineage and existence, but honestly, they can just fuck off for that. Major Wood Slap, who was sitting on a stool beside Makino, just sighed heavily with a mug of beer in hand. He really needed a drink after hearing what happened to Marineford and what that brat Luffy did. And as much as he wanted to shut them up, he knew it would be pointless. He was glad those boys made it out of the messy ordeal alive and well. Although it still didn't change that they were now even more notorious criminals though. We shouldn't be celebrating about this. Those brats have gone off and became even more of a menace. Cheers to that. Major Wood Slap couldn't even find the strength to retort towards them after prior attempts and resorted to just sighing instead. Even if I'm the damn major, people won't listen to me. The major slumped down dejected while Makino giggled behind him while looking at the bounties of Luffy and Ace. Luffy and Ace sure are trouble magnets, aren't they? At least they still are definitely alive, Makino beamed. After the war, Luffy and Ace had never been sighted apart from Luffy showing up at Marineford and ringing the Ox Bell a few days later, probably to avoid Marines that would definitely hunt them down and not let up and trail behind them if they were sighted earlier. She and everyone in Fuchsia knew they were alive and well, and probably eating a whole lot, torating and being noisy, much to Wood Slap's annoyance, until the door opened with Dayton and her mountain bandits behind her with a serious expression. Everyone went quiet and tensed at the mountain bandit who walked up to the counter and sat beside the major who was internally panicking but kept his composure. "What do you want, you damn mountain bandit?" Dayton snorted and looked amused. She could see the fear and worry in the major's eyes. "Isn't it obvious?" The woman took out a bag of berries and dropped it in front of Makino, who upon seeing the bandit's expression just smiled and went to fill another mug. Dayton turned around towards the entire patrons of the bar waiting. When Makino finally gave her a mug, she grabbed it and raised it in front of them. "I'm here to celebrate my boy's achievement. Why didn't one of you came and told me?" At that, they relaxed, and their smiles and grins returned and raised their mugs back to her. Maybe the mountain bandits weren't so bad after all. "Sorry, we were too busy drinking ourselves in joy over this. Ain't that right, lads? Invite me next time. Why won't ya, you selfish bastards? We shouldn't be celebrating about their crimes, damn it." In Shellstown's bar, 3 days after the war, "Will Kobe be okay?" Rika asked worried while sitting beside base commander of the 153rd branch, Ripper, along with his fellow man. Ririka came over and gave Ripper a glass of wine, the other man accompanying him a mug of beer each and her little daughter Rika a strawberry sundae. Ripper just pat Rika's head and rubbed it reassuringly. "Don't worry lass, that lad of ours got guts and was personally trained by Vice Admiral Garp. Ain't no way he ain't gonna keel over and die from a scare like that." The Marines gathered in the bar had several bandages wrapped around parts of their body that had been injured during the war, but they were fortunately the ones who received the lesser injuries. It was a fucking shit show, especially when they saw the same kid who took down Morgan, falling down from the skies above with several prisoners and proceeded to beat the ever-loving shit of the Marines. But even if Luffy has become a threat that could no longer be ignored by the government, he still would be the same boy that freed them from their previous hellish base commander. But still, that other friend of his has definitely been either holding back or had a major power boost. To beat the three admirals like that and that poor admiral even if he was a piece of work. Ripper shuddered. He was one of the unfortunate Marines that witnessed the devastating hit that unfortunately graced Admiral Sakazuki's nuts. But after seeing Kobe try and single-handedly stop the bloodshed even though their objective was lost, he felt way less bad for him and also his respect towards the boy being raised considerably. He knew he was a Marine and he shouldn't be thinking this, but thank God for the red-haired Yonko Shanks stepping in and saving Kobe from a fatal blow coming from that red dog. Right now, Kobe was in a coma, and they had no idea if he had woken up or not. After the war, all base commander that weren't in a severe state with the Marines that are under them were to be immediately sent back to their base and manage the islands they're tasked with protecting. They had left several islands open just for the Yonko fight. Right now, the boy was in the infirmary just like the many injured Marines. Noticing the mother and daughter duo's confused expression, he just huffed before taking the new bounty poster and displaying it to Rika and his mother. Rika looked at awe while her mother looked stunned when they saw their savior's new bounty. His bounty is taking rather a considerable time to circulate around in this sea, but everyone will eventually know about it. Ripper sighed. Higher-ups are losing their crap and going nuts over trying to calm down the press over the failure, especially what the boy did. But even so, we won't forget what he did for us, but make sure word doesn't spread about his actions. Could draw unwanted attention, yeah? Ripper said, smiling softly while winking at Rika, to which she smiled. My lips are sealed. Rika continued smiling before Ririka remembered something. Oh yeah, Ripper-san. What is it? My daughter is interested in being a waitress in your base. Do you mind taking her in as a trainee of sorts? In Baltigo, base of the Revolutanaries, Sabo had come back and greeted everyone before making his way towards Dragon's office. Everyone who looked at his face as he walked couldn't help but wonder what had their chief smiling from ear to ear. Absolutely beaming with positivity with a certain bounce in his steps. He was so drunk of joy, he didn't even bother to knock nor open the door like normal. Instead he just kicked the door with a stupid grin on his face. Dragon turned to Sabo a bit amused at his actions but didn't show it. I take it your little reunion went smoothly? At that Sabo nodded rapidly. Yeah, Dragon huffed before going back to his serious attitude. Anyways, you came at the perfect time. We had just received words about 2 crewmates of Straw Hat being sighted. That snapped Sabo out of it, and he looked interested. Really? Who are they and where? Demon Child, Nico Robin and possibly, Blackleg, Sanji. Ivankov from Mamoiro Island had contacted us around a few hours before you left and we conversed a bit before he informed me of someone claiming to be, Blackleg, Sanji on his island. But his bounty poster doesn't match his facial appearance at all. Sabo didn't react much to Ivankov's return. He knew Ivankov-san would be okay. Ivankov slightly suspects the man to be a government spy, but besides that, not much is known about the man for now. Sabo's slightly tense but relaxed knowing Ivankov-san could probably take care of the man if he did turn out to be a government agent. As for Nico Robin, Kuma unfortunately sent her towards the bridge country known as Tequila Wolf. At that Sabo seemed stunned. Isn't that? Dragon nodded in confirmation. One of the places we liberated a few days ago. But unfortunately she was sent there prior before we showed up. It took some time before the news finally reached towards us, which was just a few minutes ago. Dragon continued on. We should be expecting for her arrival in another 2 or 3 days or so while Ivankov is busy investigating further about the man's identity. Also, did you manage to get away to contact my son? Sabo nodded and grinned. Yeah. Before we departed, I exchanged numbers with Rayleigh-san who is training Luffy right now. He raised an eyebrow at the mention of the Dark King. Really? As in Roger's first mate? Sabo nodded. Yeah, that guy. Sabo went on to explain that Luffy was training with Rayleigh for 2 years while his crewmates were presumably doing the same thing. His son was strong enough himself and could take on any opposing forces form the New World, but his crew on the other hand he couldn't tell. He only knew their bounties and what they did on paper, but that was it. He can't gauge their strength without personally seeing it in action or in footage. With that in mind, he assumed that they were probably around the levels of a low-ranking rear admiral theoretically. They have potential to become stronger if they unlocked or train their haki, work on their personal flaws or improve and upgrade on something they have good efficiency in. Which now made him frown slightly when he thought about training. What kind of insane batshit insane training did his crazy old man put Luffy through to make him so damn powerful? He knew his son was going to be strong, but he didn't expect for him to be close to Yonko levels of strong. He shrugged off that thought for another day. He was inwardly shivering remembering his own training from his old man. Sabo, if possible, contact Rayleigh and get Luffy on hold from him when either Ivankov confirms that it is Black Leg on his island or when Nico Robin arrives. Got it? At the LOCAT Pirates? Oi. What the hell are you guys talking about? Ace right now was flabbergasted and shocked of what his brothers and one sister said towards him with either smiles or grins on their faces. Marco, the first mate, walked forward with a lazy smirk. Isn't it obvious, Yoi? Or should we say it again? The Phoenix took Ace's silence as a yes. Turning around towards his siblings with a grin, he shouted. All in favor of Ace being the next captain say aye. Aye. All Whitebeard pirates, without hesitation, shouted in agreement over this decision. But why shouldn't it be you, Marco? You're the first mate, you know. The pineapple just snorted, as if it was always going to be you. Ace, you're the favorite brother, Yoi, and besides. Oyaji and us talked about it before the war took place. We knew Pops may not make it out alive with his condition, and even if did, he wouldn't have much time left over that, Yoi, Marco said solemnly. Everyone had held their breath and tensed up when they had that talk before going into battle to save their favorite brother. Some even had tears threatening to spill out of their eyes when professional nurses on board the ship gave their professional opinion, even if it also hurted them to say it out loud. But they knew it in their hearts it was bound to happen. His cancer was progressively getting worse, his old age just making it faster and worser for his health. He suffered from several strokes throughout his life. It was honestly amazing and a testament to his strength that he could still wreck Marineford that badly with not only his poor health but also with how many injuries he had sustained throughout that war. But I got myself captured. Yay, we still haven't scolded your ass for that now, have we? Did you have any idea how much we worried, Yoi? Marco said with tick mark on his head. None of them had drilled their disappointment into his thick-headed skull. Yet, and before you start spouting about how you are too weak, remember that most of us witnessed how you could somewhat go toe-to-toe against Pops Yoi. Weakened or not, that still is something not a lot of people can do, ya know? Ace was about to talk about how he was Roger's son, but again before he could open his mouth, Marco cut him again almost as if he was reading his mind. And also, before you start talking about how you are Roger's son and how that makes you unfit to take after Pops, are you Roger's son or Whitebeard's son? Okay, now Ace stepped in at this slightly pissed. Oi, I'm always his son, not that bastard of a pirate king. Marco lazily smirked at that. Alright, as his son, you should obviously take over his place with how you are not only the favorite child, but also the favorite sibling. End of discussion, Yoi. Oi, hold, oh, Ace is here by the captain, let's celebrate. Yeah, I haven't ag, bring out the booze and food. Zhu, make sure to get the crocodile meat, Congratulations. Ace, let me have a say over this, damn it. Over wherever Shanks is at, a few hours after leaving Whitebeard's funeral. Anchor sure has grown strong, Shanks said sitting down with one hand on a bottle of bourbon while the other had his new bounty. It was safe to say they were surprised at first before proceeding to throw a celebratory party over their anchor's achievement. Ben just snorted and smiled slightly after taking a huge sip of whiskey. Of course he would. Don't you remember that he used conquerors and armament when he was just fucking 6? Especially when we trained him and helped him understand what he could do. Shanks just huffed and smiled in nostalgia at that. He didn't expect to be shocked by anything in the Eastern Seas. But Luffy proved him dead wrong with how he dealt with those mountain bandits. especially that one who flaunted his bounty and tried to kidnap him. Poor bastard must have broken a few bones when Luffy turned the tables on him and started punching and kicking him while using armament before landing a huge blow and sending him off into the ocean, where he was later eaten by the local sea king. But that's what he gets for trying to kidnap Luffy. And also, with the fact that his father is the most wanted criminal in the world? Usopp added before chugging a bottle. All of them snorted before Lucky Roo grinned. I bet you that Luffy's mother turns out to have a ridiculous background or reputation. All crewmen on deck grinned while coming up with bets on that. 1,500,000. It's a celestial dragon. That family tree line of anchors is beyond fucked that it might just be possible. 5 million on the mother turning out to be a woman that turned into a man to disguise the identity of who Luffy's mom is. Snort, as if, bet you Anchor's mother turns out to be a high-ranking marine and it's an extremely private affair. 7,500,000 on that being the case. I'm gonna one-up you on that and put 8 million that it's a cipher pull agent. You all are thinking too small. Everyone winced before looking at one of their crewmates who looked beyond wasted with bottles of alcohol surrounding him. 10 million. It's one of Big Mom's child with how Anchor's appetite is as big as a sea cane. Everyone looked in disbelief at that ridiculous bet and how much he was willing to put such a hefty sum of money for it before Shanks grinned at that. Oh yeah? I bet the mother of Anchor is Big Mom herself. Everyone looked even more flabbergasted towards their captain's extremely bold bet. Even the drunken one instantly sobered up. That's how ridiculous it was. This was getting beyond stupid and generally out of hand at this point. And how much are you betting on it being the case, Captain? Ben raised an eyebrow towards his captain, removing his cigar in exchange for having a bottle of whiskey in his mouth instead. 156 million. He immediately did a huge spit take at that. Everyone looked at their captain before looking at each other. And proceeded to just drink, laugh and joke around at that. As if Big Mom could be Luffy's mother. Right? In the wreckage of Marineford, 2 weeks after the war. Right now, every person who could move were packing stuff and placing them on boats to be shipped off towards G1. The Marine headquarters was planned to be moved from Marineford to G1 after several discussions on what to do moving onwards after the war. Although, for several men, that was postponed as they can't help but sweat while staring towards two admirals facing each other off. Even if Fleet Admiral Sengoku supports you in taking his steed, your lazy and incompetent behavior is inappropriate for such a high-ranking position and carrying out justice. The center of attention was Admiral Sakazuki and Admiral Kuzan facing off. On the Red Dog's side it was boiling hot while the Blue Pheasant emitted a cold chill around his surroundings. Aokiji has not responded or retorted in any way, as Akainu kept stating how he shouldn't be the fleet admiral and sometimes threw insults in his sentences that was directed at him. But he kept his chill. After all, he had a very strong counter-argument, courtesy to a certain pirate. Aokiji kept silent until he raised his head up and smirked. Sakazuki-san, you, being the fleet admiral? Let's not joke around. With the biggest grin Kuzan could muster, he finally retorted with one sentence. With one sentence out of his mouth, it caused everyone who heard him to drop their jaws and single-handedly made him the most respected man on the spot for what he just said. Navy history was in the making with the insult from Aokiji directed towards Akainu. From this single sentence alone, you ain't got the balls to lead the Navy. Admiral Kuzan, the legend that the Navy didn't need, but deserved. A fight ensued later on in Punk Hazard that was recorded as the most legendary and most destructive battle between two admirals that went down. And even if Aokiji lost or won when he fought Akainu on that day, it didn't matter to him. He would be the one smirking in the end when he remembered the rest of his life. Back towards Luffy and his family, it was a long and boring ride with Brule and some of her siblings pleading for her mother slightly for Zeus to move at max speed, while Broy along with some to put their foot down and heavily convince their mother that it was not a good idea, for their sake, to go faster. Big Mom just shrugged before she took a coin out of seemingly nowhere and flipped it. Heads will be max speed and tails will be normal speed. Katakuri looked towards his siblings that sided with Broy in pity. For fortune was not on their side, as it landed on heads. When Mama flipped the coin and it landed on heads, Broy paled while Brule grinned. Zeus. Max speed. Yes Mama, oh, come ooh. As if history was repeating itself, Broy found herself clinging to Brûlé while the older sibling just grinned and laughed. Unfortunately for some and fortunately for others. It was rather short-lived. The island's over there, Broy said when an island finally came into view. At that, Zeus slowed down before eventually stopping upon Mama's orders when they had a good distance between them, much to the disappointment of Brûlé, Luffy and several others, while Broy and the rest let out a huge sigh of relief. Marble stepped up and took out binoculars and inspected the island. Looking at the island, she noticed how the layout was similar to that of a normal marine base with several forts fitted with cannons surrounding the island. "What does it look like?" Mayukuru asked, walking and crouching beside her. "They are built similarly to a marine base. Loads of twin-barreled turrets and some triple-barreled turrets surrounding the place. Their base is probably at the center with how much that one building stands out." With her long arms, she pointed towards the giant building that looked like a medieval castle. "What about their port?" Big Mom asked. Marble turned her head towards the left, looking at the harbor. "Their port's got 3 ships docked, a modified civilian galleon with extra cannons mounted and having some steel on their hull, while the other 2 seems like regular civilian frigates. The harbor's got barrels, crates, and cages." She asked to particularly no one. She was wondering what the hell were in them. There was huge rags covering them so she couldn't tell. "Cages? Anything in them?" "Can't tell, they're covered." She passed her binoculars towards Mayukuru, who was beside her. After passing it around so everyone could get a good look, Big Mom ordered Zeus to move again. "All right, Zeus. Hover over them above the clouds." "Yes, Mama." After ascending towards the skies, the children looked in awe, admiring the night skies above the clouds while Big Mom walked forward and looked down. "That's at least a 25,000 or 30,000 feet drop from Zeus to down there." She took off her hat and turned towards her children. "Napoleon. Expand." "Got it, Mama." The hat homie slowly expanded towards the size of a caravel. "All right. Listen, you all get into Napoleon, and I jump off. Once we land, leave Napoleon and start slaughtering everyone. Got it?" She spoke her plan out. "Yes, Mama." "Wait, what?" Most of the Charlottes agreed while the rest weren't really keen on that idea. Some were thrilled by the prospects of falling off from Zeus while others couldn't stomach that. Don't worry about it, it's just a few seconds of falling." She lowered Napoleon down until all 86 of her children were on board before picking the homie up and looking down. Some were reluctant to get in Napoleon while others just threw themselves in and were hyped about it. Taking one step back, she jumped. Operation Night Witches, commence, Chapter 20. At the harbor, 2 men were walking over to the harbor to have a smoke break. What's wrong, Pensador?" the man asked, side glancing at his friend rubbing his chin in deep thought. "Don't you think Butcher-san and his group are running a bit late? They should have shown up right about now." He's probably having too much fun with dismembering and chopping those people up along with the rest. We should have went with them," the men said reassuringly with a hint of jealousy. He wanted to skewer and bath in the blood of the Toto land citizens and Charlottes along with them. "I don't know, man. Sure, we are strong, but we still are targeting a Yonko's territory after all," Pensador said, sweating a bit. He was more confident if it was a warlord's territory that they were targeting, but they weren't hunting for them, they were hunting something bigger. And they may have bitten off more that they can chew for all they have known. He wasn't the only one. Prior towards the operation, when they raided and made this island theirs, they were initially going to target a warlord's territory in the New World, but their boss wanted to hunt a bigger fish, a Yonko's territory instead. Some of his monks protest, to which he either waved off their worries or just straight up executed them on the spot himself for insubordination. They zipped their mouths and agreed to this very reluctantly. They wanted to disagree, but they didn't want to join their friends who did vocally display how they disagreed, which demoted them from a member to funds and profits. The plan was to deceive idiots into a suicide mission under the guise that it was a capture mission when they were actually just pebbles being tossed towards a bear. They kept tossing group upon group until it was deemed that the Yonko's forces should be weakened enough for attack. But the smarter ones that weren't high of their power, win streak, ego and increasing notoriety knew this wasn't going to work. Pebbles weren't going to do shit. The only thing they were doing was just poking a hornet's nest. A big fucking hornet's nest. Whatever. Anyways, got a lighter? Mine seems to be out. The man sighed, looking somewhat irritated with a cig in his mouth as he kept flicking his lighter without a spark being set off. Yeah, sure, give me a minute. His buddy dug into his pocket and found his lighter. He brought it into his own cig in his mouth and flicked the thing a few times before finally a spark ignited and it lit up his cig. Alright, here's a thud. The other man had his jaws hanging open, letting the unlit cigarette fall out of his mouth as he stared wide-eyed towards the night sky. Oi, what's wrong? Is that the sun? Before he could fully register what his friend said. Prometheus, incinerate, candy shower, mochi Hayden. Juicy sparkle. Juicy sparkle. Charlotte Smoothie shoots several exploding droplets of juice, water from her sword. Based from pirate warriors. Their defenses mounted around the island were destroyed before they could even aim or know whoever was attacking them. The sirens sounded and a panicked voice could be heard over the speakers. Attention! The Big Mom pirates are descending down from the skies above us. The man looked surprised before looking up and paling considerable when he saw pretty much their grim reaper coming down on them. They poked a sleeping behemoth, and it woke up pissed. He uttered one word that summarized their situation, right before he himself died along with his buddy when they turned into a sponge from the raining arrows made out of candy that skewered them. Shit, Charlotte's paw, brace. Thud. Big Mom made sure to jump and land onto one of the boats docked in harbor, breaking the boat in half with her landing. Before her heels were touching the seawater as the ship was sinking, she leapt onto the port and her children immediately left the hat while drawing their weapons when they saw the oncoming forces. Mama, your ord. Parasparrow was cut off as Luffy zoomed past him, sprinting towards a group of enemies with his finger in his mouth. Gear third. He jumped and blew onto his mouth, while his siblings watch on his reckless charge. Gomu Gomu no. Gigant pistol. He decimated the forces like bowling pins. Big Mom looked on amused before issuing her order while pointing at her reckless son. Follow your brother's example and just destroy them without hesitation. Pick a group to play with, that's my order. Yes, Mama. They followed after their brother. Many observed the many organ harvesters that were flooding down from the stairs. Some just jumped down or fell off from the harbor down to the port. Luffy landed and deflated his arm back to normal while giving a challenging grin at the enemies who had several faces of shock, fear and surprised. Oh oi, what the hell is someone like him doing here? Did Mugiwara allied with Big Mom? A man stepped up with a feral grin. So, what if Straw Hat allies with Big Mom or not? The Charlottes are all here in one place, aren't they? Their organs are gonna sell high when we rip it out of them, kill them. Yeah, their morale shot up instantly and they charged recklessly towards the family. The Charlottes just split off to deal with the several small forces that were approaching them. They sure are confident in themselves. Oven scoffed at their ignorance before calmly walking towards a group, looking at the man clad in what seemed like custom-made medieval armor which made him stand out as the idiots under him raised their weapons and charged at him. He snorted before launching a boiling warm right hook when they got close enough. Heat DENASSHI. He threw a punch infused with his devil fruit, decimating the reckless enemies and melting their weapons and for the unlucky ones, their skin in the process. He kept walking forward while staring at the knight, who even under his armor, he could tell was sweating slightly, which had Oven grinning sinisterly. What's wrong? Can't handle the heat, he taunted him. HMMPH, don't be so full of yourself. You're our prey, Soru. The knight flashed behind the high-heat human, plunging his sword into the man's back to skewer the man's heart. But was shocked when his blade melted into molten steel upon touching his skin. He stared at his broken blade which was glowing red before he dropped it while backing up away from the man, the monster in front of him. Oven slowly turned with yellow glowing eye trails and gave a smile that was mocking and taunting in nature at the shocked man that thought he could actually wound him without haki. Ho, you scared? Why not I give you a nice warm hug? Oven said mockingly with a wide smirk while spreading his arms wide open while he took a stance to charge at him. Monster. The armored man started to sweat even more as the monster wearing human skin in front of him just kept glowing and getting brighter in front of him. In fact, it felt like he was slowly getting cooked alive under his armor. Oven without warning, launched himself towards the knight who squealed and tried to move out of the way, But unfortunately, he collided with Oven, who wrapped his arms around him and put him in a tight bear hug. Do you know, tightly covering food in aluminum tin foil and shoving it into the oven to cook it creates more steam in the process? The Mont's eye widened before he slowly faced the monster, hugging him with horror etched all over his face, his instinct telling him to do anything it takes to get away from him, while the monster hugging him kept the grin on his face. Humans smell like burnt pork roast when cooked for a certain amount of time with the right temperature. Oven's grin kept getting wider and wider while his eyes held glee in them when the men went from frozen solid to squirming a lot, and he could hear him whimpering and sobbing for his life, his flailing not helping his case at all. He wanted to make him panic even more by slightly raising the temperature a bit, which got what he wanted, screaming for absolute mercy now while trying to wiggle his way out of his grip. Let me go. Someone, save me, Oven snorted before he slowly but surely raised the temperature higher and higher at a slow but steady pace, which made the man panic more. The armor his prey was wearing has turned into a human-shaped brazen bowl, his very own sarcophagus that accommodated to his build. Steam slowly started to come out of his visor while his armor was starting to glow red from the heat. No, 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 let me go. Let me go. Someone, anyone, get me out of here. He kept screaming and wailing, squirming and shaking his entire body desperately to get out of Oven's grasp, to no avail. He responded to his struggles by tightening the hug but kept the increase of heat at the same pace, making sure not to melt the armor and only heating it. He wanted to make this a long and painful experience for him. He wanted to make these bastards pay dearly for annoying him and having the audacity to attempt and bring harm towards his siblings. Although it might be short-lived when he saw how enemy reinforcement was approaching his position. The reinforcements approaching were shocked and alarmed when they saw one of their top officers getting roasted in a bear hug by one of the Big Mom's children. Oi, let go of Briggs-san. Kill that man, yeah. Tisk. Guess our hugging session is over, a shame honestly. The man just responded by letting out whimpers in response. He broke his vocal cords with all the screaming. Steam was emitting from his visor a bit, but was able to fully obscure his face, which probably was for the best. He was no longer wiggling, possibly from relief that Oven would end his suffering and just kill him already. But just as Oven was about to let go to deal with the reinforcements. Don't worry, I will handle them, Daifuki said stoically while walking past his brother, scoffing at the knight wrapped around his brother's arm when he took a quick glance while he walked forward towards the enemy while waving off at his brother. Continue baking him and feed him to the fishes in the ocean when you're done. Oven just smiled at his brother, especially with his brother's suggestion on what to do when he was done, before slowly grinning towards the burnt man who whimpered even more. Even with his vocal cords broken and possibly fried, he still was able to painfully let out a few words. Let G go. Juste. K kill me already. Oven snorted before acting like he was deep in thought about whether to prolong or end his suffering for a few seconds before he disturbingly, cheerfully beamed at him. Nope, and just like that, he raised the heat again, much to the man's burning despair. Daifuki didn't look impressed by the small group charging towards him. He surveyed his surroundings before grinning at the group in front of him. His siblings weren't near him, which meant he could freely command his genie to his bidding. Mama and his siblings were not happy when he sometimes hit his own allies or almost grazed his siblings whenever his genie swung. He shuddered a bit when reminiscing, remembering his younger sister Smoothie chopping the shit out of his head for nearly putting a scar on one of his sisters when he flew into a blind rage when he was dealing with a bastard that kept dodging. He even subconsciously reached to rub his head as if he still could feel the pain. He rubbed the center of his belt, which had a depiction of a genie lamp which was glowing. Let's go, genie. Blue smoke shot forward from his belt and it formed into a giant blue Basento wielding Majin. The organ harvesters approaching Daifuki now paled and came to a full stop. What can I do for you, master? Those insects charging at me. Off with their heads. The genie, HMPHED, when receiving his orders, and flew towards the group, who now slowly started to take a few steps back. When the genie got in range, he let out a war cry and spun his Basento above his head, which had the enemies finally sprinting away. Unfortunately, they still were in range. Genie Uine rage split. He swinged horizontally and expertly aimed for all of their necks, separating their heads for each and single of them, even those who were the farthest from his blade. Daifuki stopped rubbing his belt, which made the genie just poof out of existence before looking back at Oven and whistled at the sight. The night Oven was cooking had his armor showing signs of melting with how molten steel was dripping of him. The visor emitting white steam was now emitting black smoke. He finally stopped hugging him and just lifted him up so he could come face to face. Well, what's left off his face? He had to give it to the men though, cooked for such a long time but still hanging in there, even if it was by a thread of his life. It was quite an impressive feat to live for that long while cooked alive for roughly 5 minutes under such high temperature. Welp, let's hope the fishes and especially the sea kings find you still edible. With one hand holding onto his torso, with all his might, he tossed him far into the ocean like garbage. Alright, we should probably sweep the harbor clean and move up to port, Oven said, observing the port while Daifuki grunted in agreement. Towards their left, their younger sister, Amand, walked slowly towards her own group that she would deal with. She hadn't unsheathed her blade yet, in exchange for holding a cig and lighter in her hand to smoke, all the while calmly walking towards the organ harvesters. She couldn't smoke throughout the journey so her non-smoking siblings wouldn't have to smell the nicotine from her. Demon lady. A person amongst them murmured in fear before gulping while shakily gripping his blade. Putting the cig in her mouth and lighting it, she was satisfied she could finally smoke, although it didn't show on her face. She put away her lighter and had a hand on her sword's hilt and unsheathed her weapon slowly. She finally bothered to raise her head to see them with her eyes when she could see their feet under her hat before taking a deep inhale and exhale from her cigarette. Not worth putting much effort in killing or drawing out a fight from them, really. The organ harvesters were tense as the tall woman in front of them kept walking calmly towards them. She muttered something under her breath before vanishing. Huh? One member of the group exclaimed before there was suddenly a large shadow looming over them and they now could smell the faint scent of cigarette smoke. Wait, shit. She got BEHI, slow waltz. The last thing they saw was their headless bodies with Amand looming over behind them with a bloody blade as their heads hit the floor before they blacked out. Amand sheathed her blade before looking over her sisters, particularly paying more attention to Ephiler. They were about done with dealing with their group. She looked around and saw her other siblings sweeping through the harbor and narrowed her eyes at the forces they're either dealing with or dealt with. The information Snack received about how many people they should be expecting was either a lie, or they hired a lot more men, which made the information outdated, with the latter being the most likely. Hard for anyone to lie when they were interrogated by them of all people. No matter though, just extra garbage to get rid of. She wasn't the only one who noticed the unnaturally high amount of enemy forces too. They have a little more than 300 Paroin, the eldest son said out loud to himself as he passed by people whom he suffocated in candy. Looking at the enemy reinforcements that were sent towards the harbor, they were dealing with more than 300 and they hadn't even moved up to their base yet. Although it made sense, the island's facilities and the place itself was pretty huge, which meant they would require a lot of men to maintain and operate the entire place. Either that or their little friends in Mont d'Or's prison may have been way more mentally fragile than they thought, and they spewed out information in a haste to stop their suffering that was dish out from Snack and Cracker to get them to spill about the organization. Judging by how they were recklessly charging towards his siblings without a second thought, as if they were confident in taking one of them down, and the fact that he has only seen one so far using Soru, he has nothing much to worry about. The eldest son, Parasparrow, hearing his own name being said, he turned towards the source of the voice with his interest being piqued a little at the men who spoke his name. Ho? And who are you supposed to be, Paroin? Your executioner? Cuckoo. You, my executioner? Are you sure it's not the other way around? Parasparrow said, putting more weight on the last part with a challenging look, daring him to make the first move and try to even put a scratch on him. The man scowled before quickly going back to a poker face while looking like he was heavily concentrating, which made Parasparrow narrow his eye and put his guard up a bit at the man's facial expression. The man dashed forward and threw several throwing knives at fast speed, but Parasparrow quickly prevented them from hitting him. Aim Mini Yumiishi, he spurted candy from his left hand, not only stopping the blades from hitting him, but the candy was also making its way towards the knife thrower, who quickly leapt over it before he could be engulfed by candy and was now wielding a tomahawk aimed at the eldest son of Big Mom, who in response just simply blocked with his staff. The man leapt behind Parasparrow and tried to kick him with haki infused in his leg. Parasparrow was now even more interested. It has been a while since he fought a haki user. And he was the first one in a long while besides his siblings in a spar that had him use armament haki, especially to defend himself. But not only that. Who are you? You clearly stand out more and dress differently amongst the savages that dared provoke us, Paroin. Parasparrow asked with a diplomatic tone with a tinge of playfulness in it. Me? Well, considering you are going to be a dead man when I'm done with you, I guess I should indulge you. I'm the leader of Silence Embrace, a mercenary group of 890 men for hire. Ah, now it makes sense, Paroin. Guessing he paid really high for your services, huh? Especially for you to target me, huh? Parasparrow said with a joyful tone that didn't hide the venom dripping in it. If he was the leader, his siblings wouldn't have problem with the rest of the lower members then. Although he should watch out for more hired groups. Indeed, he would fully pay me your bounty of 700 million, unlike the Marines who would give 30% of what you're worth if I present your corpse to them. Quite the deal, Indeed, Paroin, a hefty sum of money. Why not I strike a better deal for you? Parasparrow said, getting quite amused when he could see the greed in the man's soul flaring up. A man driven by money, someone that shouldn't be trusted. So blinded by greed that he wasn't even paying attention to his surroundings. Ho! A deal with the Charlotte family would be quite beneficial and may prove more valuable than the present deal for your death. What do you propose? Yours, Parasparrow said, mixed with a hint of venom in a gleeful tone. So be it. Your head shall W. What is this? The man tried to move into a pose, probably to strike him, but couldn't move his legs. Looking down, he was surprised when he saw a puddle of candy underneath his feet that was slowly making its way up on his shins. Do you think you truly dodged my initial attack, Paroin? I was busy buying time by talking with you as my small sea slug of candy was slowly crawling towards underneath your nose. Coo-coo-coo-coo-coo-coo-coo. Curse you to hell. The man said, struggling to move as the candy moved up to his upper torso now. Not the first nor the last who will condemn me to hell, Paroin. Now, Candyman. The candy instantly made its way onto the man's face, suffocating him to death as the candy forcefully entered his mouth, ears, nostrils and eyes. Coo-coo-coo-coo-coo. Now, I wonder if there were more groups hired, Parasparrow muttered to himself. It seemed plausible. Organs do sell quite high in the black market, which meant more men could be hired. The harbor was slowly turning from a battlefield to just hills of bodies littered everywhere. Finally, after some time though, the numbers dwindled into none. We have dealt with more than 2,000 of them from my count, Katakuri said, sitting down with his legs crossed on piles of bodies while stabbing his spear onto one of them and let it stay there. Many had a hole between their eyes while others showed several holes punctured through their bodies. He turned his head and was looking at Snack and Cracker. Maybe we went a little too hard on our little hostages, Snack said sheepishly, rubbing his head. They might have used very strong means to get the information out of their prisoners. So strong in fact that it might have broken their mental state, because clearly, this was a little more than 300. And that excluded the people who proudly declared themselves as being part of another group or being the leader of said group. They weren't so confident when he dealt with them with ease though. He deserved it, Cracker said shruggingly while waving off at Snack. They should have known the outcome of dealing with them. It would take a miracle to even harm one of his fellow sweet commanders, including himself. Hell, even Inanna was able to incapacitate one before he showed up and finish off the man, and like the big brother that he was, lightly scolded her to go back to Mama for her safety. Although he made sure to praise her for stabbing that man in the Achilles heel, 6 years old and already assisting in murder. He couldn't help but rub her head for that as she walked with a jump in her step towards Mama with a smile, waving a knife. Probably to tell her about her small achievement. Did some of them proclaim themselves being hired men by any chance, Paroin? Parasparrow asked. In response, several siblings shot their arms up. Welp, that confirmed his suspicions then. Pretty sure I heard someone said something about being the leader of Black Hearts or whatever, Cracker said shruggingly. For me, it was a captain of the Dread Pirates. Here is the guy, Panna said cheerfully, hoisting the dead captain's limp body up with her claw still pierced through his chest. Blood freshly still dripping, she then threw the body aside after everyone had a good look. Dealt with some former Marines, But they must have been low-ranking ones, Smoothie said, pointing at the pile of dead bodies with the corpses all having the standard issue marine coat hanging from their shoulders. Not only do we have to deal with their main forces, but we have to deal with hired mercenaries, Perispero said, which everyone nodded at, but that didn't matter, they will just crush them like everyone else. Although, why have the forces stopped coming? It went from a noisy battlefield to just dead silence now, Montdor asked to no one. He was a bit paranoid and was thinking about the reasoning at the sudden halt. They probably are huddled up in the main bases and other facilities, Galette offered the most reasonable explanation towards her sibling. It doesn't matter, they are clearly weak. Let's just crush the rest of them, Smoothie said, raising her sword to the sky. Her siblings followed. Yeah, also, where's Luffy? Perispero asked, looking around before. Gomu Gigante pistol. The port shook along with several screams piercing the night, and they looked at the harbor with smoke rising from the distance. The Charlottes just stared at the smoke, some twitched their eyebrows before sighing and just running towards the harbor. Their brother sure was reckless. Bruh, couldn't upload, save or shit on fanfic for a while till now. Still busy with personal stuff, but I think I can manage somewhat. On brighter news, the Telehead is nearing 4.5k subscribers, so that's neat. Working on all 85 offend etc, so there is that too. Also, the Wattpad Veer, so far for now, will have a couple of chapters rewritten. Chapter 1 now has a bit of a flashback between the moments of Big Mom and Dragon. Next chapter will probably be a short side story, so I could put the bios in cheeky smiley face. I will also be making another story later down the line. Essentially all one-shots of how Ace could have been saved from Marineford or impelled down while I rake my brain on ideas on how to progress this story. Anyways, here's a canon omake cheeky smiley face, Akainu's miserable adventure as Fleet Admiral. Akainu sat down in the Fleet Admiral chair in his new office after his promotion, his body heavily wrapped in bandages underneath his clothes from his fight with Aokiji. It was definitely going to leave a scar. He was staring down at the table in frustration, reminiscing about the fight. That bastard. Damn. Aokiji muttered, cursing as he laid down on his stomach before he turned over and looked towards his lower torso and grimaced. His foot was definitely a lost cause, the burns were too severe. He looked up, away from the leg, and focused on a less but still severely injured Akainu panting heavily but still standing up straight without slouching as he stared him down. Blood covered his entire body like him. Give up, Aokiji, I will never accept you as Sengoku's replacement, Akainu said, wheezing a bit before he breathed heavily while panting. He didn't know how long it had been, but the fight must have gone on for days straight. Neither side were willing to lose this important battle of their lives, a battle that will be the ultimate decision of what the Navy shall become. Either way, it will be a turning point in marine history. The loyal Red Dog against the Blue Pheasant, both suffered severe wounds, but in this moment Akainu had the upper hand with amputating his fellow admiral all to achieve his goal no matter what. He respected his strength, but somewhat as laid back and lazy as him couldn't be an admiral. He refused to accept it. He would ruin the Navy if someone as incompetent as him was to be put in charge. He took a side glance towards the other admiral who was spectating from the sidelines. Sitting on a lawn chair with a bucket of popcorn on a table next to him while holding a megaphone which was lying on his lap while staring at them. Laid back as always while keeping his views on justice unclear to anyone, Kizaru took a handful of popcorn and ate them, not breaking eye contact with Akainu when he see him side glancing, and instead shot him a smirk which had him getting his attention back to Aokiji. Aokiji defiantly just smirked at him before he made an icicle, and stabbed it into his burnt leg and cut it off. He grunted in pain before he placed his hand on the stump and froze it and made a peg leg of sorts with ice. And let someone like you take over? Aokiji said, standing up, getting used to the ice peg leg while glaring at Akainu before grinning again, which had Akainu practically internally groaning. You don't have the balls, and now Akainu was groaning externally in irritation. He has AAA point YAAA no WW? Kizaru said into the megaphone while munching on popcorn, which was also transmitted on the megaphone, which now had Akainu additionally facepalming. How many times did it make it? How many times did Kizaru join along with Aokiji? How many critical hits did he have to take to his dignity and pride before Aokiji can fucking go down? Kizaru reached into the bucket for another popcorn but couldn't feel anything inside. He shrugged before he reached down into the ground and took his second bag of popcorn and opened the plastic packaging and refilled his bucket before throwing it away and going back to eating popcorn. Akainu just gritted his teeth and charged at Aokiji, who did the same. One was smirking mockingly at the other, who was gritting his teeth in frustration. He looked at the cigar box in contemplation before taking out a cig and lighting it, inhaling the toxic fumes to calm his nerves. He won the battle, but at what cause? Even as Aokiji handed in his resignation, he continued mockingly smirking and taunting him as he left, much to his dismay. Fleet Admiral Sakazuki. Branu approached his office in a panic with sweat on his face as he saluted, which had Akainu's attention. At ease, Lieutenant Commander. Akainu stood up as Branu dropped the salute, but he did not loosen up at all. What is it? Akainu asked, wondering what had him scurrying here looking panic. Multiple marine bases and ships have been attacked. What? Who's responsible? Akainu understood the man's worries immediately now. Fire Fist Ace. The son of the accursed Pirate King. What is his motive? Akainu scowled, remembering the failure of the execution immediately as his name was brought up. Branu just shakingly raised his hand, which held pictures, which had Akainu raising his eyebrows at before taking them and looking at them. What is this? Akainu asked, dumbfounded, as he turned the pictures towards Branu, looking at him in disbelief. The aftermath of his attack, sir. Akainu just pinched his nose at that as he looked at the pictures again. It showed pictures of the deck, hulls and cabins of numerous marine ships, along with pictures of multiple marine bases along with their facilities. They all had one thing in common: multiple messages burnt and charred onto the surfaces, like a lunatic in a mental institute writing on the walls frantically. Change my name back to Portgas. The ace showed, burnt onto every possible places it could be burnt onto. What shall we do, sir? Branu asked frantically while Akainu raked his brain. Abiding to the cries of a pirate was something he would never do, but right now, he had the responsibilities of managing every single marine. If Gold D. Ace didn't have his name changed, then he would continue attacking anything affiliated with the Marines. He could foresee the severe migraine coming his way if this were to continue. And besides, with his name changing back to Portgas, the damage would have already been done. Multiple posters of him bearing goal in his name had already been printed and spread throughout the world. They won't retract it back, they will just print another set of posters with his Portgas name on it. Even if they do magically disappear, everyone would have burned it into their memory that Ace was Gold Roger's son. Branu? Akainu asked, looking at Branu. Why, yes? Get a new bounty of him with Portgas back in his name, along with increasing his bounty to 910 million for his destruction on marine bases and ships. But make sure every marine is reminded that his name will always truly be Gold D. Ace. Yes, sir, Branu said, walking out and closing the door behind him, leaving Akainu alone. He slumped down and rubbed his head. He had a feeling, deep down, that maybe he should have let Aokiji handle the upcoming shitstorm as the fleet admiral. He could feel in his gut that it was maybe not worth fighting for the fleet admiral position for the upcoming future. And he just had to be right about that. Chapter 21. The Charlotte split off in separate directions, going building to building and clearing them out of any enemies, while their mother did the same, slowly walking while her children around and below 12 followed behind her closely. Although she made sure that Smoothie would chase down and join Luffy in demolishing them. Right now her son was making a beeline towards the center, their main base. He could probably handle himself just fine, but she still wanted someone to keep an eye on him. There are many ways to tell a person's personality when they fight. And Luffy is proving to be similar to Cracker, reckless. For the rest of her children, anyone above and around 13 were trained in combat by either personally herself or their older siblings. They can reliably take on the fools hiding, considering they were clearly beneath them with their pathetic display of strength at their harbor. As she walked further towards the center of the island, she could see smoke and fog coming from several locations, sometimes accompanied by the screaming and agony of people. Good, they are snuffing them out. Zeus and Prometheus were floating in the skies before they lowered themselves to around Big Mom's shoulder as her children looked at them in wonder. Mama. I know, she said knowingly and patted her two homies. They nodded and grinned before raising themselves up near the clouds again. She clapped her hand before stopping dead in her tracks, turning around to face them with a bright smile. All right. Let's have a game of spot the idiot hiding around us. Now then, where do you think these soon-to-be dead people are hiding behind? She cheerfully asked her spawns with a dangerous glint in her eyes as she looked around her. She could feel the souls of around 60 people. Most of them were inside the buildings around them and were just behind the closed windows while others took cover in the alleyways and corners outside. She couldn't help but internally laugh when she could physically see a man clearly trying to hide behind cover on the roof when she was around the height of the building, and he was shaking a lot, making it even more obvious. "Eh? There are people around us?" Viro asked, clearly surprised even though it didn't show as his hair blocked half of his face. The other children also were surprised and started looking around them. Mama nodded before grinning brightly at them. "Indeed, and if you spot them, I will give you candy," she sang the last part, practically dangling a prize in front of them. Her children perked up at that and turned their heads in several directions, eyeing their surroundings in curiosity without worry if they jumped on them. Their mother was with them after all. As her children were essentially playing hide and seek with them, she slowly took off her hat. "Napoleon, sword form," she said with a neutral tone while taking off her hat. "Homie." "Yes, mama." She held onto the hilt and stabbed the blade into the ground and waited patiently for her children to spot someone. She noticed Anglais widening his eyes at a direction and she took a glance to where he was looking and scoffed. A window on the third story quickly closed a split second when it was in her line of sight. The fool probably was trying to take a peek at them. "Mama, I saw someone open the window over there," Anglais cheerfully beamed while pointing up at where the idiot was hiding behind. She could now sense panic in his soul, which had her grinning wider a bit while Anglais' siblings followed his finger towards a closed window. "Oh, are you sure you weren't seeing things?" Big Mom said, teasing her little son if he actually did see a man while she walked up to the window. She made sure to add more weight in her steps to let the fool know she was approaching his hiding spot. She placed her hand on the wall above the window and just waited. She was tempted to tap against the wall but ultimately just waited. "Yay, ISWE." Before Anglais could finish his words, the windows slammed open and a man sweating heavily pulled out a cannon and aimed at Big Mom's face. He was shaking uncontrollably in fear as she just had a disturbing Cheshire grin sharply pointed at him. Before he could pull the trigger or anything, she slid her hand that was touching the wall and grabbed him from above, squeezing him until she heard his bones breaking, not caring nor stopping as he screamed for his life. She grinned as she was absorbing his lifespan while crushing him, like squeezing juice out of lemon. After a while she eventually could feel and hear his bones break. She grinded the corpse in her hand carefully, turning his bones a bit into powder before she dropped the meat bag. She took the handkerchief she kept in her pocket and wiped the blood from her hands. It was a hassle to clean off when dried and hardened. "Good job." She knelt down and rubbed Anglais' head with one finger, which he enjoyed with glee before giving him a giant piece of wrapped candy that she kept in her pockets, to which he beamed at before he unwrapped and started chewing on. She raised her eyes at her other children who looked on in jealousy before she clapped her hand to get their attention. Now, there is still plenty of people around us," she cheerfully said, which had their mood lit up at that. "Now, where do you think they are?" Her children lit up and started looking more frantically with grins on their face. She waited patiently as her children slowly but surely snuffed 21 more out, to which she drained their souls off. 38 more left, and she could feel the uneasiness, the fear dripping off them, much to her delight. Most of her children grinned as they had a piece of candy. Some of the more observant ones rewarded 2 or 3 for spotting more people. But few of her children were clearly sulking over not getting candy, particularly Dosa. She gently knelt down towards her children who didn't had any and gave them 1 piece each, much to their surprise. They looked up at their mother in surprise and wonder. "Don't be so disheartened, a lot of your siblings also aren't really observant. We each have our own strong points and weak points. The next time we play, it might be something you excel in," she explained gently towards her children, who grinned back and had their moods raised up. "Yes, mama." They beamed back adorably. The joys of being a mother. Smoothie was taking a casual jog with Luffy by her side. It would seem like a nice stroll if you take aside the buildings that were turned to Swiss cheese with the amount of holes and chunks missing from it, and especially the limp bodies of organ harvesters that they punched, kicked, bitch slapped, drained and stabbed off. It took a while for her to finally catch up to her brother, with her taking care of the ones who weren't in her brother's way and hid like cowards. But she made it and just jogged with her energetic brother who had a big grin on his face as he punched people left and right while she kicked and stabbed them, sometimes giving them a backhand slap. "You really are like Cracker in his younger days," she offhandedly remarked, seeing the similarities in recklessness while Luffy tilted his head at her in curiosity while punching a person who jumped out of a trash can. "Always attacking without help nor a plan," she huffed as she sliced a building in half to get to 20 of them who were either hiding behind or inside the building. She. "Don't worry. I'm strong," Luffy beamed at her while flexing his arm, emphasizing his point, which had Smoothie giggling under her breath in amusement. Cracker? You are going to go alone?" A 10-year-old Smoothie clung onto said older brother's leg while looking worried. Cracker rubbed Smoothie's head with a confident and arrogant grin. "Yeah, don't worry, I'm stronger than those weak fucks," he reassured her before he widened his eyes, realizing what he said before looking around frantically as if he was being hunted by Cypher Pole while Smoothie deadpanned at him. He had a sailor's mouth, a loose tongue to boot with it. She was pretty sugs, including her learned cussing from him. Safe to say Mama was not amused by his antiques. Maybe those rumors of his first words as a baby being, "motherfucker," are actually true. "Don't tell Mama what I said, yeah?" Cracker smiled nervously at Smoothie, who continued to give a stoic and emotionless look at her brother. "Buy me grape juice when you come back, deal?" "Yeah, just like a certain strong reckless idiot older brother." And I'ma be honest with ya, I wrote the omake first before the actual chapter LMAO. Anyways, it probably will be weird considering the omake may actually be longer than the actual chapter, but I have my reasons. P. Still working on something really bloody long. At the end of finishing it, it probably would be like 30 to 80k words long theoretically. I don't even know if it is possible to fit it into a chapter 2. Was planning to put it here, but I am still not finished with it. Anyway, here's a omake that is canon, especially with Kizaru. Omake features Shiki gets up to date, Akainu suffering more, Kizaru's happy time, Shiki's bounty. The golden age shall return again. Shiki looked forward towards the island he was approaching with a sinister and grim look on his face, all the while basking in the good old fresh wind and the smell of seawater that he used to take in when sailing before he got his ass handed to him by Garp and Sengoku. It seems the world has moved rapidly forward while he was imprisoned and impelled down. Roger was executed in that pathetic little town in the weakest of sea of all places, like those bastards planned to carry out the execution. But the biggest piece of news that he was taking in right now was the War of Marineford. To think Edward of all people was gone. It was an odd feeling for him, for a Rocks pirate, even one of the former horsemen and strongest out of them, for him to die was so odd. But it wasn't unexpected, from what he heard while spending his time, and absolutely wrecking the brat's little palace, choking out the cabin boy with seawater who weirdly was smiling all the way through, quite literally asking for death. He didn't know if he was super drunk or he just swinged like that, but he ain't one to judge a person's kink. With Kaido and his little group, Edward suffered from declining health and old age, even possibly having strokes throughout his battle to save one of his sons. He snorted when he thought about Roger's child. He couldn't help but find it all too amusing. Portgas Diaz, or rather, Gol Diaz, the child of the pirate king on board of his rival's ship. Even acting as a commander under Edward's ship, it was all too funny to him. He should pay a visit to his sons when he finds their whereabouts and have a drink with them. In fact, he was planning to drink with all the emperors and their crews except for Kaido, for he already did that with him. Especially with the brat that sailed under Roger and replaced him as an emperor of the seas after his fight with Garp and Sengoku, Shanks. And when that is done, he will find Edward's grave, finally pour a bottle of sake for the now dead former crewmate and mourn in silence, his final drink with Edward. He closed his eyes and reminiscent about those days again, when he was just a crewmate with people who somehow had either the same or more screws loosed in their heads than him and were stab happy on a 24/7 basis. He still remember when he woke up in the middle of the night to someone who had a knife above their head, ready to plunge it into his chest, to which he immediately killed them and just went back to sleep. Ah, the good old days. But as much as he would like to remember those blood-soaked glory days and have a drink with the emperors right now, he had to do something. He had several newspapers around him, and he had gone through all of them. Like he suspected, Numbskull pirate wannabes are scavenging the seas for Roger's treasure, much to his displeasure. Sengoku was promoted to Fleet Admiral, which Shiki hummed at. He could see it, although it seems he was stepping down now and was replaced by a Kainu who was promoted into an admiral while he was in Impel Down, it seems. He still remembered all those times he taunted, mocked and beat the living snot out of the Red Dog when he was still a low-ranking fool who blindly chased after them, particularly gunning for Rock's head, much to the crew's amusement back at the time. Some pirates serving as government dogs, to which he scowled at. They were a disgrace to be even considered pirates if they accepted to be under those snobby bastards. He would rather go to war, bring hell forth the Holy Land and die under his own terms rather than be under their control. Several crews of pirates above 100 million that are considered the worst generation, to which he scoffed at. Worst generation? Has the world forgotten about the previous generation where Rox was still around? Although as he pondered on that, he realized that they probably put a rug under that bloody and chaotic part of history. He widened his eyes a bit when he thought about something and scoured through the newspaper, and his assumptions were correct. None talked about him being out of Impel Down. Hell, none talked about any Impel Down prisoners breaking out at all. But as he looked through the news, he knew why. Not only was the execution a failure, but a rookie from East Blue. He couldn't help but feel boiling anger and internally grumble. Of course, had to be that bloody sea of all places, was the main reason it went to a shit show. From the revelation broadcasted live that he was the son of some brat called Dragon, to breaking Portgas D'Ace out of his cuffs, to beating the current admirals and even castrating a Kainu, to which he winced but laughed, and finally getting away with it with minimal injuries along with the surviving members of Whitebeard and supposed to be executed brat from Marineford. He was interested in that East Blue brat, especially when he found out his name was Monkey D. Luffy, Garp's grandson. A rookie pirate from paradise that turned into a major threat, now that got him to bust out laughing maniacally. Better yet, Garp's son and father of Luffy was a revolutionary, the most wanted criminal that is openly revolting against the government. Now that made the sun seem to shine brighter when he found out about this information. He could feel his hair shining gold for a moment, it was so good. It made the fact that this rookie was from that pathetic sea more bearable. The world is in disarray from what Garp's grandbrad did in Marineford, so naturally, to save a bit of face, they placed a rug under the mess that is the biggest breakdown in Impel Down history. Yeah, he could see the citizens' reaction to how pathetic the Navy looked after botching up that big event at Marineford. Add the Impel Down breakout and people might protest and riot for their incompetency, so covering it up seemed natural. And he was about to pull that rug for the whole world to see. Hell, he might pull the other older rug while he was at it too. He's sure the others won't mind it. He couldn't help but want to pat Garp's grandbrat on the shoulder for absolutely demolishing the Marine's reputation for what he did when he met him face to face eventually. After all, he helped spread the message he wanted to convey for everyone to know, but he wanted to cement it. The rookie laid the foundation base, and he will show up to place the sign onto it, and finally make the message go through everyone's thick skulls. What this means, what will always be a fact. Pirates are the one true rulers of these seas. Fleet Admiral Akainu, Branu, showed up yet again towards his office looking pale. Not a good sign. It has been a month after the War of Marineford, after dealing with Aokiji, after dealing with Gold D'Ace. And now whatever Branu is about to report to him. There were other notable problematic pirates, especially Eustace Kid. For reasons unknown, he has been more active in attacking towns, ports and marine bases, kicking the violence. He motives so far are unknown. But his bounty had been increasing more and more because of his recent atrocities. A lot of high-ranking Marines were sent after him, but he keeps either slipping through their grasp or decimating their forces, much to his irritation. At ease, Lieutenant Commander, report the situation, he said coolly. He was getting adjusted towards his new position and the duties of Fleet Admiral. But that was probably because he was smoking to deal with the shit show. When he was an admiral, he just had to report to the Celestial Dragons and Sengoku. When he still was the Fleet Admiral, he occasionally dealt with upstarts that proved problematic for their potential to become a major threat in the future. They were quickly snuffed out before they could grow. But now, he has faced his biggest opponent yet, paperwork. Dear Lord, the reports from all the bases, the request for supplies, the request of Marines with notable accomplishments and ranks to be transferred to another base. He has taken interest on two particular individuals after looking through their reports. The requests for research and development in weapons and prototypes form the SSG. There were also reports of notorious pirates being spotted, reports of confrontations and combat aftermaths with said notorious pirates too. How the hell did Sengoku handled all of this? Unfortunately for Akainu, Sengoku didn't handle all of this alone. And the Buddha might have let it slip in his mind to tell him he could hand the paperwork to a division he personally made to deal with the stacks of doents and reports. But hey, he's on vacation. He pinched his nose, ready to deal with whatever bad news Branu has come to deliver to him to add on. Gold Lion Shiki has been spotted approaching Sabaody. Akainu widened his eyes and let the cigar fall out of his mouth before gritting his teeth. Shiki, the flying pirate, a prominent rival of Roger, more prominent than Whitebeard, for they had confronted each other more frequently. That bastard had tried talking the Pirate King into an alliance where they could rule the bloody world together. Fortunately, that never came to fruition after the Pirate King's execution and the Golden Lion's imprisonment. But now the lion is freed from his cage, with his rival dead. Who knows what his next move will be next? But more importantly, a person who is supposed to be impelled down, out of his cell and sailing freely, if the public recognized him, which they surely will. Quickly, get every available marine that is either on or close to Sabaody to intercept the Golden Lion, Akainu said, standing up and heading outside. I want every vice admiral on base to get on a battleship and form a fleet with Kizaru acting as the head of it. Branu flinched at that, which had Akainu narrowing his eyes. What is it? Branu gulped before looking nervously away from Akainu. Admiral Kizaru is. Akainu couldn't believe the bullshit he was hearing right now. What do you mean he went out for his happy times? Kizaru smiled as he went into his room on the small ship that was far, far away from Marine HQ and locked it. Sitting down on his chair, he placed numerous tone dials on his desk with several recordings of music on them, and for the center and main piece of interest in Kizaru's eyes, a bag of Zaza that he dropped onto the table. It helps keep his mind calm and focused, allows him to plan his next move and series of attacks on his opponents rather than frantically shooting out attacks in wild panic. Speaking of keeping his mind calm, Marineford was a shame. He couldn't hit a blunt before the war. If he did, he could have properly fought and deal with Luffy. He was genuinely taken aback by his usage of armament haki when he was intercepting him. If only Akainu didn't drag him off towards the execution platform before he could get high, he could have kept a cool, calm collective consciousness. His mind was racing too fast. Too many thoughts were going through his head before he could even think of countering his fist with his own haki at the time. He was planning to get Akainu back for effectively killing his high, but seeing Straw Hat kick the shit out of Akainu's nuts, now that had him smiling even without being on some ganja. After that, he had to deal with pirates groups popping right, left and pretty much anywhere after Whitebeard just had to confirm the existence of Roger's treasure. It was pretty easy to deal with them, for they were just idiots who got ambitious with egos that might even be larger than his stash of green. Then Akainu just had to get salty over Aokiji being the next fleet admiral after Sengoku. Speaking off, thank fuck that no one knew he occasionally went on a break during Aokiji and Akainu's fight to smoke some good kush. Although they probably wouldn't have noticed, considering those two were so engrossed in their fight to even bother looking at their surroundings. He leaned back on his chair and slumped his legs onto the deck. He gently raised his left leg and hit the play button with the heel of his shoe on one of the tone dials and let the music play, the intro sounding pleasant as he rolls up a stick and smoked it, exhaling the smoke with great pleasure while the song continued progressing. Smoking without a care in this chaotic world, for he left his Den Den Mushi back at base so no one can interrupt him. As long as the Zaza kept rolling towards him, he was a relatively happy man. This was the life. Akainu groaned. Must he do everything by himself? Advise everyone that I shall be leading the fleet in Kizaru's stead instead. He sighed as he walked towards the harbor, taking in the sight of all the ships docked before. Branu, take point as the temporary fleet admiral and make sure run things smoothly in my absence, and… Yes, sir? Branu responded as Akainu stopped dead in his track while staring off at the hallway, seemingly lost in thought to him. If the Golden Lion Shiki is indeed spotted by citizens and especially the news reporters, and in the worst-case scenario, Shiki gets away with it, put him on the list of potential new Yunkos and reactivate his old bounty. of 4,160,000,000 berry. Chapter 22 25 minutes. It took them 15 to clear the harbor before they spent another 10 minutes pushing up towards the town and closer towards their base. It was honestly a bit pathetic. They easily plowed through their large forces that spilled forth unto their harbor with minimum effort. Some stood out from the rest, but they were dealt with like the rest of them before. It was just smooth sailing from that point. They were dealing with pretty much the leftovers at this point. Many siblings internally admit that it was a nice change in events. Going out of Toto land for a nice night stroll through the corpses of their enemies was much more fun than the boring patrol duty and ingredient gathering task. They enjoyed this moment of freedom and savored it. But for the rest, they were rushing it, most prominent being Katakuri. Some of them wanted to end on time and head back home and just hit the bed, where they let the embrace of sleepiness take hold of their bodies, letting them slumber. Right now, the siblings closest to the main base of operations were Luffy and Smoothie, followed behind by Cracker and his triplet sisters. Speaking of which, these buildings sure are old. Custard offhandedly commented while walking beside Angel while their big brother was ahead of them. Angel nodded at that statement as she looked at the two-story building towards her left. The harbor and port's appearance and condition were a stark contrast towards the main town. The port looked like it was built a month ago, while the buildings looked centuries old, but unlike ancient ruined buildings, these ones were still very well intact with a bit of moss on it, several cracks forming and a few walls missing a few chunks, but it still held strong. It seems abandoned. Well before those bastards came over and took over this place and made it their base, Angel said while Custard nodded at that in agreement. Is there anything written down about this island before the organ harvesters came around? Custard asked Angel, who shrugged, making her look at Cracker instead. Hey Crack, she said, using his childhood nickname the triplets, fondly, have given him to get his attention, to which it did. He stopped dead on his tracks and turned slowly towards them. What? Didn't you hear what we were talking about? She pouted childishly at him while he shrugged in his armor still. She sighed and repeated herself. Is there any history written down about this island before? Ya no. The island became the base of these guys? Custard said, kicking one of many that they had slayed. Cracker shrugged. Nope, I don't deal with that shit. Go ask Mont Dore about it later when we see him. We probably have a book about it somewhere in our library. He turned back and continued walking while the sisters stalled for a second before they continued walking with a sigh. Yeah, they probably should have expected that. As Cracker walked, he was frowning inside his armor, twitching his eyebrows, digging through his memories. Something doesn't add up though, Cracker said internally, cranking the gears in his head as he started recalling his ventures. He had been through several missions which involved claiming islands, gathering ingredients and etc. He had been to several places. He wagers about either a quarter or a third of the New World. He had even traveled to Mogaro Kingdom before to chat with several brokers to inquire information related to something Mama desired. Several times throughout his 30s before his strength was required elsewhere, but he still frequented the island somewhat, his last visit being about a year ago. And he will deny any accusation or claims his siblings made about him going there just to witness the underground fights that happen in a certain part of town while betting most of his allowance and spoils of war on a certain pair of funky siblings. No sir, not at all. He has taken several routes there, came across several islands along the way when visiting the place. He never remembered coming across this island before. Not only that, the map snack used. In the library geography section, they have an archive section containing several maps of the entire world, each map made from when a new year came rolling around the corner. The map snack was using was the most recent and updated one so far until the next year started to roll in. This island was between Mogaro and Toto Land, Big Bro Daifuku's island to be more specific. That was between the kingdom. And he had traveled along that path. Even departed and sailed off from Daifuku's island once. Everything was in proper working condition. Everything. The compass definitely was working considering that they were able to reach the kingdom and go back smoothly. So how the hell did he not see an island that he should have come across? That was something he will think about later. Right now, just kill anything moves. Enemy contact. Just like right now. Pathetic. Katakuri huffed in slight disappointment, expecting a much more stronger force than the ones in the harbor, but he easily plowed through them with ease. Anyone that was called strong amongst the enemy ranks were clearly just some guys that has a grasp of haki, Maybe even know a government technique as a bonus. And that was pretty much it. He had set extremely low expectations for them to be able to put up much of a fight, but they somehow managed to dig underground and go lower than he could have ever imagined. But honestly, after seeing Luffy easily deal with that one guy back then, yeah, he probably should have foreseen this. And speaking of Luffy, he expended and stretched his leg with mochi, also adding spikes around before hardening it with haki and let it stay there high up above the buildings before a bunch of enemies bursted forth from their hiding spots and were about to shoot him, until they were squashed by his foot. Needs more momentum and just general speed. It would be better if I used my arm instead, he commented to himself, retracting his leg and looking at his hand and thought about it, thinking about how he would gain said momentum to slam down his fist at a fast speed. He also wanted to finish quickly to get back home to eat his beloved donuts, maybe even spinning one on his finger before he ate it. Spinning a donut. And it hit him. He was smiling a bit underneath his scarf as he now knew how he would reach the speed. He saw one of the organ harvesters somehow still alive from his attack and was crawling away, albeit slowly and twitching a lot. He took several steps back while facing the crawling man before he turned into a donut and was spinning rapidly towards the man. He leapt up before returning to normal, raised his hand which stretched and enlarged with spikes on it before hardening it with haki, making it look like a gigantic, spiked mace. With the momentum from spinning as a donut, he slammed it hard into the crawling man. I will call this buzz cut mochi, he said while inspecting his opponent which was stuck on his arm thanks to the mochi before he grew another idea. A way to finish off the opponent, but he won't put much strength into it. The man was already dead upon impact. He stretched his mochi arm above the buildings and spun several times before he slammed it down, grunting a bit as he put a bit of muscle into it, resulting in an explosion of debris and dust to be formed as he slammed him into the ground. As the dust cleared, a giant hole was formed from where he slammed him into. Katakuri hummed to himself, satisfied with the move he created before he moved forward while thinking. I wonder how many more moves my little brother shall display. He mused while walking towards their base, wondering how he can mimic or get inspired by his little brother's movesets. Luffy was casually jogging with Smoothie towards their base, occasional punching some dude that popped up. Keyword being, was. As he was running, he suddenly stopped in his tracks, frozen in place for a split second before a bit of drool coming out as he turned towards the direction. The direction of where that delicious smell he so bloody missed. Meat. He shouted with arms raised before dashing off, literally leaving Smoothie in dust who just looked confused before ultimately shrugging with amusement. Little bro has a strong nose when it comes to his favorite food it seemed. She saw how Luffy dealt with that one guy back hours ago, really not worth remembering with how weak he was, she probably could deal with the boss herself. But, she was curious about what meat tasted like. Smoothie never had eaten anything like meat throughout her life, but her older siblings did. But that was because Mama left them on an island so they wouldn't get hurt while she sailed with the Rock's pirates. It was a rare sign of motherly affection considering how she was like before. Sadly over time, with how they spent most of their lives in Toto Land where the main source of food is desserts, snacks and sweets after their mother returned after the Rock's pirates' disbandment, her older siblings gradually forgot the taste of meat, so she really had no idea what the taste is like. Sure. Many of her siblings, including herself obviously with how she was a sweet general, went out of Mama's territory to do tasks and stuff that benefited the crew and kingdom, but they never really ordered meat before. Because they wanted to go back immediately in fear that they would incur the wrath of their mother for taking too long and they will have to tell her why it took longer than usual. Well, back then anyway, they still were on that mindset that something bad would happen if they were later than usual. Nothing really changed about that. Old habits die hard, she internal thought, grimacing a bit at that. But they were getting better, they were slowly getting used to live and do personal things for themselves and not for their mother's sake and ambition. They were getting used to living out their lives for their own sake and their own lives. Do things that they personally wanted to do without ridicule or disgust from their mother's gaze in the past. They could wear whatever they want without being forcefully dressed up like some kind of doll for all to see and gawk at. They could talk freely and be themselves. No longer putting up a facade because they weren't allowed to show their true selves to others. She could stop hiding her right eye underneath her hair because it was different than the other. The mere thought of such freedom hasn't truly gotten through her and the older siblings' skulls yet. She finally stopped turning her head, which kept looking between the path of her objective and looking to place Luffy ran off to just staring at where he ran off to now. It wouldn't hurt to be selfish and curious now, would she? So, she looked at the direction of the base of the enemies before shrugging and heading towards the direction of where her brother went. It might be irresponsible of her to postpone her duties as a sweet general by dragging out her task to eat foreign food. But it was her life. And damn it, she wanted to enjoy and live a little. And naturally she went from hunting her target to chasing her brother while internally chuckling in amusement. She never really thought much about her freedom till her brother came in. Mere days of him socializing with a few of his siblings. With her personally interacting with Luffy for a few minutes. And yet even with those few minutes of interaction, he had her realizing about how she was free to do whatever she wanted now, without even speaking to her about it. But looking back, with Brûlé who seemed to walk more straighter and brighter after coming back with their little brother, Poire and Bascarte being more confident with their appearance, Pudding when they leaned in to listen to their night conversation. She couldn't help but hold a genuine smile on her face while facing forward in curiosity and amusement as she spoke to herself. Luffy. You are an interesting little brother. I wonder what effect you would have with the others. Amazing. Luffy stared starry-eyed at what seemed to be the canteen kitchen. There were pots of steaming hot curry with multiple bowls, some empty while some filled with either rice, curry or both. But he ignored that in favor of staring at the giant amount of meat stacked on top of one another on a plate. He ran over and took a bite, before another, and yeah, you already get the gist of it. Delicious. Not as good as Sanji, but delicious, he exclaimed in joy within bites. Oh, so that's what it smells like. Luffy let a confused, before turning to look at Smoothie with a piece of meat still in his mouth, eyeing the meat like it was some sort of artwork in a museum. Luffy gulped down his food before fully tuning his head to look at Smoothie in confusion before his eyes widened. It can't be. Oh oi, why does it sound like you haven't tasted meat before? Luffy was visible sweating in worry. Who in their life hasn't gone on without meat? Because I never did, Smoothie answered with the most genuine voice which had Luffy's jaw hanging low in disbelief. It stretched downwards before eventually hitting the floor. What the hell? You never ate meat in your life? Luffy shouted, almost sounding desperate for it to be a lie, to which sadly it wasn't. It was merely the truth, confirmed with Smoothie shaking her head at that. Most of us grew up eating nothing more than desserts and sweets. Never knew why meat was never imported to Toto Land. We had the resources to do so, she shrugged before eyeing the plate. Smoothie went and extended an arm to grab the meat, and Luffy, for once, decided to let someone eat meat in front of him. Because goddamn, a life without knowing the taste of meat is a life he would rather not be in. Smoothie inspected for the final time before she indulged in her desire. Taking a bite out of it, she chewed on it before swallowing it and looking at the meat with awe. Delicous. She engulfed the meat and Luffy smiled, before grabbing the entire plate and eating it. She knew what meat tasted like, that's all Luffy cared about before he rapidly engulfed it all in front of her, who looked surprised. Her mouth gaping with the corner of her lips facing upwards while twitching her eyebrows before she rolled her eyes and looked amused rather than annoyed now. She could enjoy the meat later when it reached Toto Land. She remembered Mama saying she will import it to Toto Land, and she takes her promises quite seriously. Although, her siblings and herself may have to fight their little brother in order to taste even a single slab of it. Welp, there's that. Smoothie said, wiping her lips with a handkerchief she kept on her. Did you grow up only eating meat or something? You seem quite infatuated with it, Smoothie said, noting how Luffy looked like a dehydrated man in Arabasta found an oasis when he was eating it. Luffy rubbed his head as the memories of his childhood mentally appeared in his mind while he was smiling to himself. Me, Sabo and Ace were raised with mountain bandits, but we normally went out to hunt for our own food cause they wouldn't feed us. If we wanted food, we need to bring the food. He cheerfully recalled those good old days where they used to be together, but they have their own ambitions and goals now. Their brotherhood is still strong, but they have their own respective crews that they sail with. Gramps would always throw me into a forest into wild beasts to make me strong up until I was 6, where he tried to train me into being a marine. Luffy said, grumbling, sticking his tongue out at that. As if I would ever be a marine. Smoothie on the underhand winced at that. Make him stronger, her ass. That was blatant fucking child abuse from the hero of the Navy. Although she would admit that must have been a major factor in her brother gaining haki at such a young age. Seems and sounds traumatizing enough for him to gain haki that way. The brothers he sword haki that way too. She really wanted to bitch slap the fuck out Garp while draining the life out of him for being such an incompetent ass towards her little brother. Dragon more so with how he handed Luffy to said old man, but unfortunately those men aren't here right now. She shoved her hatred for those bastards aside in favor of generally interacting and getting to know her little brother better. That must have been rough being raised by that kind of guy. Mama and him used to fight often 30 or 40 years ago. Smoothie said, remembering the bedtime stories and tales their mama talked to them about. Mama fought with Gramps? Luffy looked generally shocked while Smoothie nodded in confirmation. Smoothie nodded and took out a pocket watch before putting it back from where she took it. She had enough time to tell some tales from Mama. Yeah, in fact, Mama used to sail with the Yonkos, most obvious being Whitebeard, Kaido and Shiki. Luffy sat on the table with his legs crossed while paying very attentively towards this story. A story that would be spreaded by a golden lion in Sabaody 4 weeks from now. While Smoothie was retelling small parts of Mama's adventures, a certain sister of theirs was having a good time, to say the least. I may have to move the story to mature for this, but worth it. Listen up here, y'all fucking wankers. You bloody less spineless twats. Y'all clearly are class A comedians, cause y'all life is a fucking joke. Currently, Charlotte Melise was standing on top of a bunch of bruised and bloody bodies who all were conscious. They were beaten to an inch of their lives with most of their bones broken and had no choice but to lay on top of each other while the Charlotte made them question the reasoning for why they were born to this godforsaken world. She had a huge grin plastered on her face, basking in the joy of being able to pull out her extensive knowledge of roastology on these cunts. It was nice to let loose on being a proper and elegant lady and rip these fools a new one. PP please, mercy, some dude said under his helmet. Melise looked at the man before kicking his helmet off, and looked disgusted. Was this guy even a human being at this point? Ah hell nah, what the fuck are y'all? Did y'all style your hair to look like a fucking toothbrush for Sea Kings? Bet y'all have to pay extra to stay at a place while getting charged with every second you're there, don't y'all? Your mother must have been the bravest woman on the earth with how she let herself get shagged by 16 animals and sea kings along with 7 different people of various races to create an abomination like you. If you were sold to slavery, you would be the one paying your master to hire you. She spitted on the man who looked dead inside before walking towards another victim who was desperately crawling away from the Satan spawn that was Melise. Looking at her new victim, she just nodded to herself. Oh yeah, you must be a celestial dragon with that kind of face. Cause who in the world would want to go near you? You look like the kind of guy who tries to join in on the conversation of people talking who all look at you like the most creepiest motherfucker they have seen in their lives. If you became infamous, you wouldn't have a bounty or be mentioned at all, because why would the Navy want to make someone traumatized when they see yo ass in the papers? The only thing you will be attracting in your life is germs and bacteria. I thought it was impossible for an aborted fetus to be alive after surgery, but clearly I am wrong. Let me guess, infanthood in the dumpster, childhood in the sewers and adulthood as God's mistake, right? Y'all look like y'all spent 10 years in prison for public indecency because you didn't wear a paper bag over your age. Bang Melise scoffed as the man grabbed a flintlock pistol and shot himself without hesitation after he finally had enough, it seemed. And it seemed those 10 years in the joint made you a fucking. She just stood there, basking in the absolute fuck fiesta she caused before she saw someone crawling away, looking directly at her. As they made eye contact, the man had eyes of acceptance. He stopped crawling as she walked towards him with a calculative stare, and he knew that he was fucked. Damn, school started again. So balancing on this is pretty rough, can manage but will be rough, as in it will take longer to write this. Anyways, here's a canon omake of Lola's perspective from Thriller Bark till now. In the eyes of Charlotte Lola was rarely fazed by anything nowadays, sailing freely around the seas. A sea king? She has seen numerous since she was a child, even slayed one as an adult with the aid of one of her siblings. A Yonko's mite, she lived with Mama and was used to fighting Kaido's crew alongside her siblings before she eventually departed from her home. But she couldn't help but spit out her water, going wide-eyed as she read below the headlines of The War of the Great. Monkey D. Luffy was Dragon's son, his son, Mama's son, her brother. She groaned in frustration, of all times to sail around without any course for a while in order to enjoy the freedom and smell of the fresh seas after being trapped in Thriller Bark. It had to be when the Navy announced the execution of Fire Fist Ace. She recalled those moments in Thriller Bark where the Straw Hats saved them before groaning again. How couldn't I have noticed? Lola was infuriated with herself. She should have had the smallest of suspicions that Luffy was somehow her brother that was taken away from home, even though the chances were small. His abnormal strength and toughness, like how most of her siblings including herself inherited from Mama, although it seemed to be getting weaker and weaker with each new child Mama had. Rarely did any of younger sibling have the potential to rival the older ones in terms of inherited strength except for Snack. The way he uses a seemingly useless devil fruit and turned it into a force of nature through sheer creative usages and applications of it similar to some of her own siblings. His large appetite. Damn, so that bastard took Luffy to East Blue of all places. No wonder they couldn't find him. They searched everywhere in the New World, leaving Paradise out in belief that Dragon couldn't have gotten that far off considering the time it would have took. But he did just that. She mentally shrugged off trying to think about how the man got that far, and favored those moments she spent blissfully unaware she was conversing with her brother. To think I had been saved by my own little brother, huh? Lola couldn't help but huff in amusement at that. She donned a serious face and stood out of the deck, no doubt that word had reached New World. Alright, you guys, chart a new course. We ain't longer free sailing the open seas. The crew jumped a bit and tensed up. Lola only looked serious in either proposing to another person or in a fight, and she defiantly ain't looking to propose. Where to cap? Toto land. The crew gulped but ultimately responded. They were pretty pale but complied, less tense and fearful knowing about Lola's family. Loosen the top sails. Get them all out. Turn the ship to starboard and let her do the rest. Check the log pose. Lola nodded. Proud her crew immediately went into action while she retreated into her captain's quarters, before proceeding to look nauseous and green in a sick horrid realization, remembering her first meeting and her choice of words when she met Luffy. Oh God. I asked him to marry me. Her family was never going to let her live that down if word got out.